My guest again today is Bruce Nelson, Bruce Buck Nelson. And Bruce, what have you done recently that we should talk about? What adventures?
Yeah, in July, I flew to Southwest Alaska. I flew down to Dillingham, and I flew out to a lake called Kissarillik Lake, and I spent 3 weeks paddling and fishing down that river. And I like wilderness, and I like getting out in the middle of nowhere, so I got a huge kick out of it because I didn't see anyone for 18 days straight, which was a big surprise because it's a known fishing river, and it's known to be a beautiful river, and for some reason, I just didn't happen to see any other people. And the headwaters were, especially like the landing lake in the first, 20 miles were just spectacular scenery. And it was, the fishing got better and better as I went downstream. So that was a great adventure.
So you have a few streaks, don't you, where you've gone on these long trips and not seen any humans at all? You've had a few of these, right?
Yeah. I went over 40 days last fall when I did my living off the land trip in the Brooks Range. And I get a huge kick out of that as the days go by. I'm actually rooting not to see anyone. I like people fine, but it's just fun to see how long I could go without running into anyone at all. And then I was looking at my video of my trip across the Brooks Range, and I think I said something like there was a 23-day stretch, if I remember correctly, where I didn't see anyone. So, yeah, I've had a few stretches in the wilderness without running across anyone, which is really fun.
So on a lot of those stretches, are you still getting news from the outside so you find out what's been happening?
You know, I in modern times, I have the ability to get news because I have an inReach or a satellite phone or some way to contact people. But I usually ask people not to tell me any news. Don't tell me any news. If there's some emergency, something I need to know, you can go ahead and tell me. But don't tell me any news just for the sake of passing along news. So I get a kick out of, at the end of a long trip, finding out what's gone on in the world. Sometimes there's just huge news, and it's interesting just to be out of touch for a while.
So on this recent trip, you didn't really live off the land, or you brought food with you, or ate fish as you went?
Yeah, I went really light on food, and I did count on getting some meals. So I did eat several meals, quite a few meals of fish and berries and things like that. But I had enough food just in case there were no berries or the fishing was terrible so I could get by.
Do you want to talk at all about how you plan in general? You've done this so many times about how you're going to handle your food and water.
Yeah, like on food, in through hiking, like if you're going to hike all summer long, you're burning just tremendous amounts of calories. You need a lot of food. I usually figure, and I think most through hikers figure, 2 pounds of calorie-dense food a day, food with no water in it. A great example is peanut butter. It's extremely calorie-dense and dense in itself, and whatever you can think of. A lot of foods in everyday life we might try to avoid are foods with high fat content. In through hiking and long distance trips, when you're bringing food, you tend to focus on things that do have high fat content because fat has so many calories per ounce. And in modern times, it's interesting how I think a person's metabolism slows down, and I can get by with 1.5 pounds of food a day now, as long as, say, if I'm on a through hike, when I get into town, if I pig out on pizza and ice cream and things like that and get maybe a 10,000 calorie day to make up for the calorie deficit.
So, do you have to keep track of like your protein intake and other stuff other than just energy or vitamins, stuff like that?
You know, maybe you should, and lots of times people recommend keeping track of carbs and protein and all that kind of things. I'm kind of a subscriber to the idea of eating a variety of foods. I have in the back of my mind I should be getting enough protein, but I just kind of like to mix it up. You need fats to keep going. You need protein to repair muscle damage, and carbs for fast energy and that kind of thing. But as long as I mix it up, have some whatever jerky, some peanut butter, some Pop-Tarts, People are always horrified by Pop-Tarts, but that's very popular for through hiking. As long as I mix it up, I seem to do pretty well.
And based on all of your experience in the outdoors, it's not a good idea to just drink the water, just trust that it's okay?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. That's one of my projects. About 15 years ago, maybe, I think was the height of it's all hype that there's some danger for drinking wilderness water. As long as you wash your hands, almost certainly you'll never get sick. And I read a very convincing article saying that in the Sierra Nevada specifically, as long as you practice good hygiene in general, washed your hands before you ate, for example, you just simply weren't going to get Giardia. The water was so pure. And so for the first time, many years, I thought, you know what, if this was a cited scientific article, which I thought it was, there's probably some validity to it. And I got Giardia right off the bat. Did a bunch of research and found out that actually wilderness water does have pathogens in it pretty often. Usually you can get by, people do. Thousands of people get by, and also many people get sick. So it's a big deal getting sick. It can have long-term consequences. So I've kind of been on a mission to convince people to treat their water, to filter their water, and it'll up their odds of having a good trip and not getting sick.
Yeah, so at times you have been active online in arguing these cases or doing the debate, and people say, hey, here's a peer-reviewed paper, says it's safe, it's got to be safe, that type of thing?
Right. There aren't many peer-reviewed papers saying that, but there are a handful. It's mostly people who start at their beliefs and go from there, citing their own anecdotal evidence of not treating water, not getting sick, and that kind of thing. But if you look at the big picture, if you look at all the anecdotal evidence and all the scientific papers and all the studies, if you look at the big picture, it's pretty clear that it makes sense to treat your water.
And what is the most common thing you do to your water? Do you do a lot of boiling of it, or you do all various stuff, filtering and...
Yeah, I do almost no boiling. It's super time consuming. You have to wait for it to cool. It burns a lot of fuel. So not many people boil their water. Naturally, I'm boiling the water that I use for cooking. So if I'm cooking a meal of, Nor's sides, or if I happen to have a freeze dried or something like that, I'll always take water out of a creek or a spring or lake, whatever, and I cook with that, so I don't treat that. But drinking water, as often as not, I use Aquamira. Aquamira is light and fairly easy, and you can treat a bunch of water at once if you want. And lots of times I'll also use a filter, one or the other usually.
Right. And you are just back recently from your Denali bike trip, right?
Yeah, that was really fun. I always wanted to do that trip. They used to close the road to vehicles, I think maybe at the end of September. And I was always planning someday to ride the road when there was no traffic. You could still see all the wildlife. But there's a big landslide at mile, I think 43. The whole road is something like 93 miles. There's a landslide there, but they allow bicyclists and hikers, if they're really ambitious, to detour along these gravel bars, along these rivers and creeks for about 4 miles and regain the road, and then you can pedal to the end of the road. So I did that. I got a friend working at a lodge at the end of the road, and that was really fun. It was just kind of a smaller thing on my bucket list, and it was really fun to have the road to myself, so to speak. I saw other bicyclists, but yeah, that was a good experience. I saw grizzlies and moose and caribou and ptarmigan and lots of wildlife and some spectacular views of Denali.
Was it a couple days, or how long did that take?
It took me, I rode in from the highway, so it took me basically 3 full days to ride in. And on the way out, I hit a rainy day I hit a lot of snow actually going in and out. And by a lot, I mean a lot for this time of year. There was basically a couple of days where it was snowing on me. It was warm enough so it didn't build up much, but it was cold and wet. So on the way out, I pedaled basically a day and a half until I got to the other side, the highway side of the landslide, and then took the bus back.
And you found some people who were near hypothermic back there. Is that right?
Yeah, they really were. I was kind of concerned about them. It had been very wet and perfect hypothermia conditions. It had been snowing, and I'm not sure how they set up their tent, but they had gotten fairly wet in their tent. And so the lady was quite cold, trying to warm up, trying to dry out, and I was trying to politely give them some suggestions, and I stuck around long enough to know that they would survive, but they weren't having too much fun.
What is the best thing to do if for some reason all of your stuff gets wet, your sleeping bag gets wet, and you're out in the middle of nowhere? I guess you got to have a fire.
Yeah, we experienced that way back when, as you remember. In Alaska, Tom and I and our dad we were in a huge windstorm and rainstorm. I think we figured it rained something like 4 or 5 inches because it completely filled up a kettle sitting outside. Wind absolutely howled. We were there were no trees around, so we couldn't properly get out of the wind. We tried to pick a spot that was somewhat protected. It was virtually impossible to get a fire of any consequence going. Normally, of course, if you do have the option, if you really do get wet, if you can retreat to some place where there's good cover, you should do so. One thing I remember Dad suggested, I think that was the first time I'd thought of it on that trip, is if you're really cold, heat up some water in a kettle and fill up a canteen, a water bottle with hot water. You can put it in your sleeping bag, and that can go a long way to warming yourself up. If you're really patient, it's amazing how much drying your body heat can do. If you have enough food to burn, I haven't got that soaked ever. That's many, many years ago. I've never gotten that soaked again, ever. And I hope to never do so. But if your sleeping bag is damp, people worry about down and condensation and that kind of thing. Your body heat will do a lot of drying at night. As long as you keep your sleeping bag out of standing water, or don't fall in a creek crossing, or don't let it get rained on in your pack, or that kind of thing.
I think that was in 1988, and at the time you were saying that was maybe the most miserable night of camping you ever had, staying out in a tent. But you did have another one, didn't you, where you had to split twigs all night long to stay, to keep a little fire going up in the mountains? That was bad. That was the same fall. That was only about a month later. So my 2 worst nights by far ever, and hopefully in the future, were right in a row in 1988. The other one was down in the mountains near Valdez, and another smoke jumper and I were up high, and we were way above tree line, and we had a couple of space blankets, so we weren't actually getting rained on, but we didn't have sleeping bags, and it rained all night long, and it was just miserable. And I worked for hours splitting twigs and finally split twigs into the fire to try to get it going. And about the time I had almost given up, a little flame started, and then I spent the rest of the night feeding in little twigs and keeping the flame going. And it eventually got about 3 inches high, maybe. And since we could get out of the rain and kind of huddle around that tiny little fire, we soaked up enough heat to make it. But I wouldn't care to do it again. Incredible. I'm very impressed that you went through both of those in a month. Out of all the camping you've done, you must have spent so many hundreds of nights now outdoors. I don't know if you've tried to add it up. It's been a lot.
No, yeah, I definitely have. I haven't tried to add it up. I've gotten a little more conservative. The hunt we were on, where we got so wet, that was kind of one of those things. Now I would probably have slightly better tent, but that was just crazy conditions. I've often thought if I were in a similar situation now, what I would do, one of the things I would have done is as soon as our tents started flooding and as soon as the one tent was blown down, we should have put our sleeping bags in a plastic bag and just gutted it out that night with our clothing, and then we'd have had dry bags from there. But that's just looking back.
As I remember, we got totally soaked. Then it got very cold. So like our boots were frozen absolutely solid, if I remember right.
Yeah, it was about as miserable as it could possibly be. And remember how we eventually ran into those other hunters, and somebody saw a tent that had gotten blown out into a lake. That might have been the pilot, I guess. Yeah. And the other hunters talked about they had to sit up all night leaning against the walls of their tent to keep their tent from blowing down because the wind was just howling. Yeah, pretty challenging.
So let's talk about your Lewis and Clark trip. It says 3,323 miles, and you paddled upstream 1,500 miles, correct?
Yep, up the Missouri River. I think I had a couple of accounts of people who had done it since Lewis and Clark. Obviously, people have done a lot of huge adventures since Lewis and Clark, but retracing that route in that way hadn't been done much. And of the two accounts, both of those people had close calls paddling the lower Missouri. There's a series of wing dams, and people try to paddle over the wing dams, and then they hit bad currents, and they flip their kayaks or nearly flipped their kayaks and had some significantly close calls. So the lower part of the river, I decided to walk. I walked as far as Yankton, South Dakota, and I figured that was legit because Lewis and Clark, members of their party, were commonly walking along the river, so I was just kind of reenacting a different aspect of the trip. And from Yankton all the way to Three Forks, Montana, then I paddled up the Missouri River. And many people warned me, for heaven's sake, don't attempt that. It will be brutal. Maybe you can do it, but if you do, you'll wish you hadn't tried. And one year I had paddled down the Yellowstone River from Yellowstone National Park to its confluence with the Missouri. And I remember I paddled a short distance up the Missouri to get to the bridge from there. And I paddled a short distance, and I told myself one thing I'm never going to do is try to paddle up the Missouri River because it was absolutely brutal. But I found out it was a big challenge, but it wasn't quite as hard as I thought. I had a faster boat, a faster kayak, and I learned to always pick the easiest paddling. So if you crossed from one side of the river to the other, like if you paddled inside bend, sometimes there were eddies where you could actually have the water going upstream for a way. So sometimes you could be paddling downstream while you're going upstream. There were some reservoirs where you're just paddling on a lake. And even when there was significant current, by picking the slowest current and just by paddling for hours and hours and hours and not giving up, I would make significant progress every day, including on the toughest days. About the only days I didn't is days when I was crossing reservoirs and the wind was howling so bad there would be huge waves, and it just appeared to be too dangerous to paddle.
So did you do an enormous amount of research to find out exactly what Lewis and Clark were doing at each spot along the way, or you listed to Undaunted Courage? Was that a major book?
Yeah, I read Undaunted Courage again before I left, and then I really got a kick out of it. I downloaded the Lewis and Clark journals. So I had the journals of Lewis and Clark and the sergeants, everyone's journal, and it was divided up by days. So every day I would follow where they were and where I was, and every day I would read what they had encountered. And that was extremely entertaining. And when just an example of one time where I thought it was really fun is Lewis and Clark ran across the first prairie dogs, and they were so intrigued by this colony of prairie dogs. And the day I was paddling that section of river, I ran across what undoubtedly was the same colony of prairie dogs 200 years later at the same spot. I look and here's the prairie dog. So that was kind of fun. And when they were first encountering mule deer, I was first encountering mule deer, and there were many parallels, lots of differences, but lots of parallels.
Some of their journals got lost, but there weren't huge gaps where there were no journal coverage. There was some coverage everywhere, I guess, huh?
Yeah, pretty much, I think. Yeah, I think Lewis himself failed to write anything for months at a time sometimes, but with all of them together, I don't think there were any huge gaps, and we have a pretty good idea what they were up to from day to day.
Okay. How long did that whole trip take?
Something like 6 months, I think.
Okay.
What did I start? I would have to look. I think I might have started at the very end of March and finished up in early September. Something like that.
What would you do for food for some trip of that length?
I was buying as I went along. It was pretty easy on that trip. Of course, nowadays I had, say, a smartphone on the hiking section. So I would be hiking along the river as much as I reasonably could and hiking roads paralleling the river and whatnot. And I would just be looking ahead to see what there might be for food supplies and packing as little food as I could get by with, and then getting to town, figuring out how far I had to go for the next resupply, and buying what I needed. And of course, grabbing a pizza if it was available, or Subway sandwich or whatever I had. And then once I got on the river, a boat, it's so much easier to carry more food than I loaded up for bigger resupply stretches. And there were also long stretches of Missouri where there weren't any nearby towns. So I had to load up a lot of food in my boat.
On these trips, have you had a lot of cases where you had to fix something using duct tape or whatever you had with you? Any tent repairs, whatever?
Yeah. Definitely. I've had my just huge rips in my pack. I've had buckles fail. I've had boats crack. I had where like the bear bit my inflatable boat. I've had bears bite my tent. And so an example of something I carry that bails me out of a lot of situations is Aquaseal. Aquaseal's a magic glue. Just on this trip on the Kisarelic one night, my waders, I discovered a hole in my waders, so I pulled out my Aquaseal, and it was raining, so I was doing it in my tent, and I was working on my waders, and I rolled over, and there was an unseen stob, and my inflatable air mattress got punctured. So I'm repairing my waders, and I roll over and punctured my air mattress, so I had to use the same Aquaseal to fix that. Yeah, it seems like it's constant repair, and it's amazing how you can usually repair even what seems to be fairly serious damage enough to get by in good shape.
Didn't you say that in your travels you've encountered other people that are living in the middle of nowhere or snowmobiling or trapping in the middle of nowhere, and they have to figure out how to fix stuff if there's no civilization for days around? Do you have any stories about that?
Yeah, let me think. I was out doing a winter caribou hunt with a buddy of mine, and the ski on his sled that we were towing broke, and he needed some way to punch a hole in the ski to reattach it to the rod that it had been welded to. And he immediately pulled out his pistol and shot a hole through the ski and wired it on, which I thought was kind of clever. He fixed it so it worked okay the rest of the trip, and how that idea popped into his head right away, I was pretty impressed. And yeah, a lot of those people who spend a lot of time in the wilderness, they've got so much practice coming up with the plan B. They're terribly skilled at it.
Let's see. Let's talk about the desert trail. We did not talk about that last time. 2,200 miles?
Yeah, that was a really fun one. I commonly look at maps of the U.S. and think about various potential adventures, and one of them I had wanted to try to do was crossing the U.S. south to north, crossing as much desert as I could, staying in the desert as much as I could, and then getting out into the mountains when I ran out of desert and continuing. And I was planning out a route, and I thought I was doing pretty good. And I suddenly ran across this route called the Desert Trail. And I looked into it, found out it had been planned from Jacumba, California, as far as Central Oregon. I'd never heard of it before. And I found out no one had hiked the whole thing. People had hiked segments of it all the way on that planned section. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to hike that because it's planned out, and then I'm just going to plan a route from the end of that all the way up to Canada. The organization, the Desert Trail Association, that had been their goal all along. And I think what happened as the years went by, they ran out of steam a little bit. They got to be a little older, a lot of the go-getters, and it got a little harder to plan a route that stayed on public land. And also they were running out of desert in Central Oregon. So with the magic of modern resources like Gaia GPS and other, paper maps for BLM and Forest Service and whatnot, I strung together a route that went across public lands from Central Oregon all the way up to the Canadian border. And I really got a kick out of seeing the landscape change from desert. It was 95% desert from Jacumba to Central Oregon, and then getting back into the big trees and crossing the Snake River and following mountain ridge lines and whatnot. And one of my most delightful moments was sitting at a fish ladder on the Snake River, and they kind of have an underground place where you can walk down the steps and look through a glass window and see the salmon swimming upstream. And I thought, this is a long way from Death Valley, where I had walked across a few months before.
So what was the trick to walking across Death Valley?
Planning your water, of course, not a big surprise. And planning when you're going to go, I think, is super important. And some of the guys, some of the gentlemen from the Desert Trail Association, they had a good idea of when to start the trail. They said you could start earlier, but there's some high country, like even crossing Death Valley, you get up into high country. So I got up into snow before I left Death Valley, and down in the middle of Death Valley, it probably got into the high 90s or so. So I planned out what I was going to do for water the whole way. Since no one had hiked it before, say on the Pacific Crest Trail now, there are guides that tell you where all the water sources are and how dependable the water sources are. And I had some information on potential natural water sources, but a lot of them hadn't been hiked, hadn't been looked at for years. So I did a lot of winging it, and I did a bunch of caching. And since I had to drive the route anyway, I put out a lot of water sources in case one of them disappeared, in case I couldn't find one, in case a coyote dug up one or something like that. So, yeah. And once I got to Central Oregon, it became a lot easier because then there were natural water sources the whole way. There was creeks and ponds and springs and that kind of thing. And I also could do my own resupply almost exclusively from Central Oregon because there were enough little towns that I could hike into or hitchhike into.
Since you did that, have you found out that other people have followed in your tracks and done that too, or no?
Yeah, there's been about 4 of them that have hiked the whole shebang, and other ones have hiked sections of it. And I think a few more will. I think my friend Wyoming will in a year or two. I think she's planning on hiking it.
But you can walk in desert for 1,500 miles as you do that.
Almost exclusively in desert. Yeah, it depends on your idea of desert, but definitely what would be defined as desert. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. Anyone would call it desert, like Death Valley and sand dunes in the Mojave. And there's a lot of desert, pure desert.
Did you say you walked surprisingly long periods of time without seeing any snakes at some point? I don't know if that was there.
Yeah, I saw hardly any snakes on the whole trip. Yeah, I'm not sure if I saw any rattlesnakes. Seems to me I saw one or two, but almost no snakes on that trip.
And then you have done a bunch of other desert hikes, Arizona, New Mexico, California, are shorter ones.
Yeah, the last few winters, like maybe in the last 5 years, it's fun doing smaller adventures. So a few years ago, I hiked across southern New Mexico, and Wyoming, and I hiked across southern Arizona. I think that's actually a good route, a winter route for adventures people. People are looking for winter adventure routes. So I planned a route across southern Arizona, which worked out pretty good, and documented a lot of water sources for future hikers to use. And then maybe 2 years ago, I hiked across southern California. So I've got a continuous route from the border of Texas to the Pacific Ocean now.
All right. And then before I forget, bucktrack.com is a good place for people to go and get more details on all of this stuff, right? You mostly document your stuff there?
Yeah, it's not all documented, but most of it is documented more or less, or at least mentioned. And some of it, like the desert trail, I have tons of documentation.
All right. Another one here, I walked with you a little bit on this border route trail you did in Minnesota, where I am now.
Right.
How about that one?
Right. Yeah. I had for years the main goal for that is I'd always wanted to do the Grand Portage that the Voyagers used to do from the river systems of northern Minnesota, Canada, the border of Minnesota and Canada to Lake Superior. It's something like a 8-mile portage. And I always wanted to do that just for the challenge. And I'd read about people paddling from basically across the boundary waters and then doing the Grand Portage to Lake Superior. And I thought it would be fun to also go across Voyagers National Park. So I started by Rainy Lake and paddle up the Rainy River, then across Voyagers National Park, and then across the boundary waters, and then did the Grand Portage to Lake Superior. And that's where you and Howie met me, and we hiked for a few days on the Superior Hiking Trail. And then for the most part, I followed the Superior Hiking Trail as far as it went down to the Duluth area, I guess. And then just for a fun way to get home, I followed the Wisconsin-Minnesota border to the family farm. So that was fun. I like paddle trips, and I hadn't spent a whole lot of time in the boundary waters. So it was a great way to see that country. And again, like paddling up the Rainy River, it was a lot of work, but not nearly as hard, I think, as people imagine.
When you did that, did you bring all of your gear in one shot, or did you have to take multiple trips to get all of your gear across the Grand Portage?
Grand Portage I did in one shot. Early on, I had lots of food because, what is the town? International Falls, is it? I'd have to look at a map again, but the last major resupply. Okay. I didn't have to do a big resupply. I didn't have to carry a ton of food from there, but after that point, after that big resupply, I had to carry so much food that I did my portages in two parts. I would carry it in two loads. It made more sense. The Grand Portage I did in one shot. I took a bunch of rests, but I carried my canoe and all my stuff in one shot.
So I just looked it up, and the story is that the Voyagers, they carried 180 pounds at least on the portage. That's true, right? They actually did that.
I guess it is true, yeah. Yep. I'll bet you when they were 70 years old, they were shot to pieces, but I think they really did do it. Incredible.
I wonder what percent of modern people could do that.
Not many. Yeah.
And those were little guys, right?
Right. Supposedly, huh?
Okay.
Tough as nails. It's amazing the difference between what you think you can do and what you can do if you have to, I guess.
I was just talking to Dad yesterday about carrying the milk cans. And you probably remember that the guy who picked up the milk cans to put them in the truck, he'd take them with one hand and lift them up. Yeah. I verified. I That's pretty impressive. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever carry 2 milk cans at a time?
I
out?
did. I could carry
Yeah.
2 when I was
Right.
whatever 18 or something. I could do
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
But the one can,
Amazing.
one hand thing, no way. Let's talk smoke jumper stories. The
Yeah.
world record mosquito slap.
Right. I was just talking to somebody about that yesterday, and we were trying to remember how many in one slap. So I looked it up, and it was 203 slap, or 203 mosquitoes killed in a single slap, which sounds like baloney. And occasionally a smoke jumper story is, but this one is actually true. They were on a fire on the north slope of Alaska, which at its worst has the most mosquitoes of anywhere. Like right now, they're all dead this time of year, but at the height, maybe late June, they can be just absolutely crazy. So there are so many mosquitoes, they said, somehow we have to document this. This is amazing. And so they were figuring out how to do it. And they noticed one guy had a blue knit cap. And mosquitoes sometimes seem to be attracted to the color blue. And so they looked at his hat, and his hat was absolutely covered with mosquitoes. And so they talked about how they were going to document it. And they looked around, and Rod Dow they figured the biggest hand, the longest fingers. So they said, I think they had a piece of cardboard. And they said, all right, now wait until it's covered with mosquitoes, and like 1, 2, 3, and we'll get his head over the piece of cardboard. And they slapped at the maximum coverage. And he said that like half the mosquitoes were stuck to his hand and half on the cardboard. And then they lined them up in rows and counted them out. And there was like 8 guys. And then they all signed these sworn statements, and they took photos and everything and sent it to the Guinness Book of World Records. And he said the Guinness Book of World Records was a little snooty about it because they said there was no precedent. So you just can't make up a new world record and try to claim it.
I thought you could do that. I thought that's what people did, but maybe not.
Well, maybe. But anyway, they didn't allow it. But this was carefully documented. Said,
It's very impressive.
yeah.
How about the stupid flips?
Yeah. We used to do those a lot. And a stupid flip, the basic stupid flip was you'd have 1 quarter, and then you'd have as many smoke jumpers as were participating. And then if you flipped the heads, you were out. And so it would go around, and normally one person would be selected at the end. Sometimes it would be a great deal. Like I was trying to think, and the basic story was, I think there was one of the last fires I was on, maybe the second to last year I was jumping. We jumped a really late fire. I remember the colors were all changed. It must have been mid-September, late September, something like that. And we had, for some reason, there was an odd number of smoke jumpers. I think most of the guys had gone south, maybe, to fight fires, and there was just a few of us left. So we had 1 extra sleeping bag. And so, of course, initially the idea is to do a stupid flip, a heads out, to see who would get the 1 extra warm bag in these cold conditions. And we decided that would be stupid because ideally somebody should be toasty and somebody should suffer. So we selected who got 0 sleeping bags and who got 3 sleeping bags. So one of the guys had 3 sleeping bags, and one of them had no sleeping bag in that cold night. And so he covered himself up with burlap sacks and cargo chutes and things like that. And actually, you know what? We had a lot of burlap sacks and a lot of cargo chutes, so he probably didn't suffer that bad. But so the next morning, of course, the guy who won all the sleeping bags had to rub it in. He's going, man, I was so toasty. That was so nice. And, I was getting a little sweated up there halfway, but, I made it okay. It was all right. And one of my favorite examples of stupid flips, which is kind of the ideal stupid flip, was the famous Rod Dow was on some project out of McCall, Idaho, and one day they all pulled out their lunches at lunchtime, and he says, let's flip to see who gets the lunches. And so they flipped, and the person who won all the lunches had to eat all the lunches, 8 lunches, and then no one else got any lunch at all. And that, I think most people agree that that's absolutely the ideal stupid flip, where everyone loses. Anyway.
So was that a smoke jumper tradition for a time way in the past, or did you help start that?
I was involved in lots of them, but yeah, it preceded me. I definitely didn't invent it.
I don't know if you want to talk about one where if you lost, you had to go grocery shopping wearing your gear. Or,
oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, one of the best ones of all for the way it just blew people's minds is we did a flip down in Palmer, Alaska. Sometimes for lunch down in Palmer, we would go to a grocery store. So we didn't have to eat whatever Subway or restaurant meals. You just go to the grocery store and just buy whatever you want. Buy a cantaloupe or whatever you're in the mood for. And we decided we would do a flip. There was a rock there, about a 5-pound rock, something like that, 10-pound rock. We do a flip to see who'd have to tape a rock to his foot and then walk around the grocery store as if nothing unusual was occurring. And that completely blew people's minds. The guy who won had to just casually walk and, select a bottle of or a box of cornflakes and a loaf of bread, stuff, walking around with this rock taped to his foot. So that was very entertaining. And then, yeah, we did one where somebody all day long had to stay in the airplane. And then when it was lunchtime, had to wear his padded jumpsuit and his helmet and his parachutes and everything, which looks absolutely ridiculous. But that was kind of disappointing because people thought, man, this must be some kind of mission-oriented thing, right? This guy is going to be so ready for fire. He's like, whatever, an astronaut. He's totally ready to go. So that one kind of bombed a little bit. And then I think maybe the one you're referring to is they did a heads out to see, they were all, I wasn't involved in this one, in this latter one, but they had to go to a Salvation Army kind of place. And the winner had to wear one item of whatever the other guys selected. And so they agreed that it couldn't be like women's lingerie or whatever, but whatever else you wanted. So somebody found just the craziest looking suit and just the craziest looking hat and the wildest colored, checkered pants and this whole crazy ensemble. And the best part was somebody selected one of those little kids walking, quacking ducks. And so the guy had to get all dressed up and then walk out of the store dragging a little walking, quacking duck behind him. And a key part of it is you had to act like this isn't a joke. I mean, this is the way we do things.
And that was back in the days when you couldn't document it on film, right?
Right, right. I think about that a lot. Yeah, it would be so easy now. Everyone would just pull out their smartphones and got it all on film. But yeah, some of it got written down, and it's definitely part of legend.
Do you think it says something about the personality of people who would be smoke jumpers that they're willing to go along with jokes like this? And because everybody goes along with it, right? They don't say, no, I'm not doing it.
Yeah, I mean, occasionally there's some people who just like, that is dumb, and they're right. That is dumb, and I'm just not going to do it. Occasionally that happens, but the vast majority do. And yeah, I think it has something to do with the personality of smoke jumpers. But you know what? There's a lot of groups. There's kind of the same dynamic. Everyone wants to think they're special and maybe not as special as we think we are. But yeah, it was, you were kind of expected to go along with ridiculous things like that.
Do you want to talk about what makes smoke jumping the best job in the world?
We got sent on a fire out of Grand Junction, Colorado. And usually it would be something like whether you were in Fort Yukon, Alaska, or Grand Junction, or Redding, California, Redmond, Oregon, or whatever, they would just go like roll one load of smoke jumpers northeast towards the Umatilla or whatever. So they probably said roll one load of smoke jumpers north. So, we got all suited up in the heat. I'm sure we were sweating to death and got in the plane and got up high where it was cooler and we had a breeze blowing on us. We'd always fly with the door open when it was hot out of Grand Junction and fell asleep. So a lot of times you get diverted too. You'd fly up to one fire and they go, you know what, let's not jump that one. Dispatch would say, don't jump that one. We got a more critical fire, and you change direction. So you'd fall asleep and then you'd wake up and they'd point at a fire and everyone would look out the window and got to size it up. So we jumped the fire and we got down to the ground and got around it and got it stopped and walking around working on the fire in an old rancher. Did I tell the story last time?
I don't think
Before
so.
I get too involved. But old rancher drives up in a pickup. And so, we're talking about this and that. And finally somebody goes, where are we anyway? And he goes, Brown's Hole or something like that. I think it was Brown's Hole. We go like, where's that? And he goes, whatever county, Johnson County. I'm making up these place names. And Johnson County. And then finally we go, what state? And he thought we were kidding. He goes, no. We said, seriously, what state? We don't know what state we're in. And it was hard for him to wrap his mind around that. So that was an example of one thing that made the job so fun is you just never knew. You didn't know if you're going to get a huge fire or a tiny, easy fire or where you're going to be up in the mountains or in the desert. And a lot of times it was a hard job. A lot of times it was an easy job. Sometimes it was reasonably dangerous or felt reasonably dangerous. And when things turned out okay, which they almost always did, it really built a camaraderie. And smoke jumper training was tough. It was tough to get through training. It was tough to get in training. And I think that builds a lot of esprit de corps. We're part of this group, and we all had to persevere to get here. And most of us are really into wilderness. And the point of smoke jumpers is to primarily parachute into hard to access fires in the most remote wilderness where fires are fought. So we just saw some incredible areas that people virtually never go to, especially in Alaska, just obscure places that are rarely visited. And here's a random story that smoke jumpers like to tell, the kind of things that you can encounter. I wasn't on this fire, but 8 guys, I think, jumped the fire out in the Seward Peninsula and caught the fire. And I don't know how long it took, a day or two or whatever. And when it was caught, one of the guys decided he's going to climb this high peak and just to see what he could see. And he was climbing and he saw a rifle laying in the scree and he picked it up and it was a rifle like maybe 100 years old style rifle with a fired round being ejected. So he brought it back. I saw it myself. So whatever happened to that guy, it was almost certainly a bear or a human had killed the guy, and it had laid there 100 years probably until the guy found it. And we're all just looking at that going, man, what is the story behind that?
Incredible.
Yeah.
One book I read about smoke jumping it's called Jumping Fire by Murray Taylor.
Yeah.
That's a guy who was a smoke jumper with you for years, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Are there other books about smoke jumping that we should be reading, or that's one of the major ones, right?
Yeah, that is one of the major ones. Rod Dow wrote one called A Few Jumper Stories, and like he tells the mosquito slapping story and a bunch of. It's mostly kind of humor stories that kind of illustrate why smoke jumping was so many laughs. He was kind of the king of fun around the smoke jumpers. And one of his sayings is, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. So he tells serious stories and he tells funny stories. That's a good one. Ralph Ryan wrote a book, Longtime Smoke Jumper. There's actually a bunch of smoke jumper books. Pretty hard to be jumping fire, though, I think. And Rod Dow is a great writer as well.
Is smoke jumping, do you think, pretty much the same now as it was in 1980, with some changes or a lot of differences?
You know what? The basic job, I think, is really similar. One of my buddies, Ken Coe, was just working. They brought him in this summer. It was busy, and they had him packing cargo chutes and repairing cargo chutes. He used to run the parachute loft for a long time, so he can still, to this day, do anything. Super smart, super competent. And that's one of the things he was delighted to tell me. He texted me and he said, man, I'm happy to report it's still the same job. It's still the same people, right? It's still people who like to laugh and they like to work hard. And they love their adventures. And and that is one of the things too. I like to tell people, one of the things that makes smoke jumping special is most of the guys would just work basically fire season. They'd come back for training. It would vary when, but maybe in April, and they'd work through the heart of fire season, maybe September, and then they would scatter across the globe. So if you had trackers on people, you would see somebody trekking in Nepal and somebody sailing a sailboat, from Tahiti to wherever, and somebody'd be working ski patrol in Colorado. And it would seem like no matter what kind of crazy stories people would come back with, it didn't surprise anyone too much, because it was kind of like, that just seems like something that guy would do. So it's kind of inspirational, leading people to believe that you can tackle pretty much anything you want.
And you put in, was it over 300 fire jumps or 300 jumps overall?
I put in, I think 494-ish maybe jumps total, of which I think 217 were actual fire jumps. Yep. Which is a lot. There's been some people who got more, but that's a lot. Yeah.
And what would you say are were the most dangerous parts of that job?
One of the most dangerous things that doesn't come to people's minds initially is dropping cargo, because the plane is flying low and slow, and you're throwing items out the door, and there's a risk of parachutes deploying early and dragging the plane out of the air, of cargo getting caught on something on a control surface in the tail of the plane, for example, of engine failure with the plane flying low. Anytime you're flying low and slow like that, there's an element of danger. And there's been some fatalities with that. There, of course, has been some fatalities from fire blowups. They're not rare, but there's been some big ones that have killed a few people. There's been a few parachute malfunctions. That seems like that would be the number one thing, but there hasn't been that many, maybe 5 in smoke jumper history out of maybe, there's probably an average of about 400 smoke jumpers that work in the U.S. per year. Lots of injuries, of course, lots of broken legs and arms and backs, usually not paralyzing back injuries, but neck injuries and puncture wounds and burns and that kind of thing. Luckily, it's not nearly as dangerous as people think. Rolling rocks, I think you mentioned that last time. Rolling rocks can be really dangerous, especially at night, come bounding down the mountain when you can't see them. Falling trees can be really dangerous, falling tree branches. There's a few things. Luckily, not quite as dangerous as people think on a per-day basis.
For me, it does sound pretty terrifying to possibly land in a 120-foot tree or something. But
yeah.
Mostly you had wide open landing areas that you could go for, or not?
Usually, if you did everything right and the wind treated you right and the spotter threw you out at the right spot, there was a place to land, almost always. But sometimes there weren't, and sometimes things out of your control happened. The highest I ever hung up was probably my fault in some circumstances. I got twisted up. Again, this might have been one of the stories I told, I don't remember, but I got twisted up. Sometimes when you jump out, especially with rounds, your lines would twist. And so I had maybe a dozen twists between the back of my neck and the parachute. And so initially you can't steer at all because you need to be untwisted to steer. And I was spinning around circles and kicking madly. Theoretically, that helps you untwist, unwind. And it was a place where it was extremely critical to be able to steer, and I couldn't steer at all because there was big cliffs and huge trees and a fire and everything. So finally, I came out of my twists, and I didn't really have any any options other than to turn into the wind. You never want to land with the speed of the wind because then it combines your speed of the parachute and the speed of the wind, and you can really slam it and really get hurt. So I just had time to turn into the wind and just take whatever's going to happen, and I landed in the top of a 100-foot tree at the edge of a cliff, and so that was kind of a big deal. And I've seen similar things happen a bunch of times, but that's the highest I ever hung up.
Is it possible to have any fear of heights and be a smoke jumper at the same time?
Yeah, it's different. There's a few smoke jumpers who are kind of scared of heights. It's different jumping out at 1,500 feet or 3,000 feet. It doesn't, in some ways, it doesn't feel as high as hanging in the top of a 100-foot tree. I think one of the more stressful things smoke jumpers do is when they do hang up really high and you have to climb up with climbing spurs. Some of the guys, it doesn't bother at all. Some of it bothers a lot, but there's various things that can go wrong. That one time when I hung up 100 feet, I was climbing up and you have a little saw. I had a little saw hanging from my belt, and of course you got buckles and snaps and ropes and things like that to hold you to the tree, and I'm climbing up, and a branch or something got caught on one of the snaps and released my saw, and my saw went bouncing down the mountain. So then I had to climb all the way down. I'm looking around. I said, well, I'll take a chainsaw and hang it from my limb over belt. That's a belt you use to go over tree branches, so you're always connected with your main belt or your limb over belt. Started climbing it with that, and I mean, in one of those just crazy coincidences, that buckle somehow came unsnapped, and the chainsaw fell like 50 feet and broke, I don't know, a part of the handle, I think. It was still usable, but that was a little confidence. It was a little confidence shaking because of two buckles had come unsnapped. I was thinking, well, I'm kind of being held to the tree by these snaps. The snaps, of course, under tension, there's 100th as much chance of that happening. But at any rate, yeah.
So most of those fires, were they lightning fires, or what started them?
Most smoke jumper fires, probably over 90%, I think, are lightning caused because they're wilderness fires. There were plenty of exceptions. Sometimes in Alaska, we jumped a lot of fires caused by maybe people in the villages out hunting ducks or bear hunters on Kodiak Island whose campfire got away or something like that. But most fires in the United States, the vast majority, are started by lightning. Some of the most severe ones are started by people, though. People, of course, being careless near towns. I think the average American, the average human being doesn't realize how easily their fire can get away. Campfire can go from just a tiny little campfire to completely out of control in less than 5 seconds, easy under the right conditions.
What do you say when people ask, why do we need smoke jumping?
Smoke jumping is often criticized because it's expensive, and it is. It's expensive training smoke jumpers and maintaining the equipment and making the equipment and maintaining the base and flying the airplanes. But smoke jumpers can get to remote fires for the most part faster than any other resource, and sometimes far faster than any other resource. If it's a fire, say, 5 miles out of Fairbanks in the road system, normally it doesn't make any sense to use smoke jumpers because ground forces can get there quicker. But if you have a fire 2 miles out of Fort Yukon threatening the village, you can have smoke jumpers there in a fraction of the time of any other force. And another really big deal is smoke jumpers per capita. They tend to have just an enormous amount of experience. The average smoke jumper probably has 15 years of wildfire fighting experience. On any load of smoke jumpers, you tend to have experts on almost anything you can think of. You have one or more, almost certainly more than one EMT. You'll have some pump experts, some saw experts, some helicopter experts, some backfiring expert, occasionally there'll be a big fire where things are just going bananas and they need some people right now who know what they're doing. They can get a load of smoke jumpers, maybe jump, cut a helispot, and then they can grab this guy to run, to lead bulldozers, and this guy to run this crew that might not have that much experience. And just a lot of skills, and they can get there fast.
So even in modern Alaska, there must be just huge sections that there are no roads. You can't get to them by
just
Fairbanks,
enormous.
Yeah.
If let's see, if say you're at the Yukon River Bridge, which is, I don't know, 75 miles from where I'm sitting, and head northwest, there's no roads at all. You can go to the ocean and there's no roads. Or if you go northwest or northeast from the Yukon River Bridge, again, there's no roads at all. So you can go 100 miles, or 100 miles. You can go hundreds of miles. Yeah. And it's just huge wilderness. I like to tell about how one time they said roll a load west, and we'll direct you to where the fire is, but just get the load rolling. So we flew west and flew west and flew west and flew west, and they said the smoke is coming from whatever it was, west of Galena maybe. And they said just figure out where it's coming from because we're getting smoked out, and tell us what we got there. And we flew and flew and flew. And it turned out the fire was in Siberia. We flew to the coast, and we still hadn't got there. We look, and the smoke is coming up from Siberia.
Wow. So you have traversed Alaska twice, north to south and east to west?
Yeah. The first one is the trip I did my video about, and I got a big kick out of that. And so I was looking at other routes I could do, and the Brooks Range is tough walking, but it tends to be easy walking compared to a lot of Alaska. Alaska tends to be just brutal walking when you're heading cross country. So I tried to figure out a route that would be reasonable to do north to south. And so I laid out a route going north to south across the Brooks Range. So starting at the saltwater up by Kaktovik and crossed the Brooks Range and got to the headwaters of the Colleen River. And I had my air taxi put a inflatable kayak there, and I paddled down the Colleen River and then down the Porcupine River and then down the Yukon River to a village called Russian Mission. And there was an old portage that it was hard to find any modern information about it, but I had the general route of where that portage went. So I paddled up a creek and started heading, trying to follow this portage. And you could see at one time it was fairly well developed. There was a system where they could winch boats up this hill and then drag them. Let's see what I guess it went all the way across to almost to the next lake. And I had some hopes that would still work. I had read an account from like 20 years ago where it still worked. It was long since not working. And I found out no one is using that portage anymore. So not only was there not a walking trail or a working winch, but it was really difficult to figure out where it was even supposed to go. I didn't tell this last time, did I?
No.
But at any rate, so this was one of the most intimidating adventure things that ever happened to me. I'm following this route, and I'm linking up lakes, and I think I have a pretty good idea where I'm going. And I keep going, man, when I get to the Johnson River, I think it was called, I'm going to be all set. I'm going to paddle across this lake, and I'm going to land right here, and the Johnson River starts flowing right here, and I can paddle downstream and then up this other creek and then to the Kuskokwim River, and I'll be all set. It'll be obvious. And I land there, and I'm looking, I land there and look for the river, and there's no sign of a river. And it's like, what in the world? I mean, how can a river disappear? And so I've got, in these modern times, I've got a mapping GPS. It shows me exactly where I am. I have two different, I have my phone and I have a mapping inReach, and they both said, yep, you're exactly where you think you are. A mapping GPS, not that it matters, standalone GPS. They both said you're exactly where you think you are. They both show the Johnson River's right here. There's no river. Well, what's the explanation of that? So I'm walking around. It's like, the rivers change courses. The lakes go up and down. The rivers and creeks change courses. I don't know where it is, but it's too late in the day, and it's raining. And so I camped the next day. I just started doing these big arcs, found a little trickle of water, basically spent all day the next day trying to follow this trickle of water, and I'm getting out of the boat, and it's floating bog, and I can't paddle in it lots of times, and I can't walk in it either one, and I'm trying to drag my boat. And so that was the next day, and I'm following all these dead ends. I go up this lake trying to find water running out up this lake, and so basically I spent all day the next day just wandering around in this endless lake, floating bog, swamp system. And, by this time I'm maybe 5 days away from another village. And I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking, I don't know if I can find my way through. I might just have to paddle back to Russian Mission and go home because I don't have enough food to stay out here forever. But just about the time where I thought, man, I'm out of luck, I got to a recognizable flowing creek, and I kept holding my breath because it kept all those prior flowing water places that it would end up to be a dead end, but it got better and better and better, and finally I was home free. I did have to paddle farther, but from then on, things kind of made sense. I had to paddle upstream and do another big portage, but then pretty soon I was on the Kuskokwim River, and then I really was home free. But that was super satisfying. At one time, boats went there all the time. Fur traders went there. Villagers went there, and there was an obvious path, and so many boats would go through there. They would keep the channels open and whatnot, and it just had grown up, and there had been a reroute of the river too. So anyway.
Would there be some modern way to get an updated satellite photo that showed you where the river was in this day and age, or no?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably. There's multiple satellite sources now. So if I were going to do that next summer, it would probably be easier.
How about comparing the Great Divide Trail and the Continental Divide Trail?
Yeah. A lot of people confuse those routes. The Continental Divide Trail basically follows the Rocky Mountains from the Mexican border up to Glacier, Waterton, and the Canadian border. That is a great trail, one of my favorites. My friend Wyoming has done that whole thing twice. But and then Wyoming and I hiked the Great Divide Trail, which is kind of the Canadian version, which starts where the Continental Divide ends on the Waterton Glacier Canadian-U.S. border, and then follows basically the spine of the Canadian Rockies up to, near the Prince George area. And a lot of recent years, there's been so many wildfires that it's been smoky and kind of ruined the scenery. And the year we did it, 3 years ago, I think now, it ended up to be a really nice summer. And so we got just crazy nice scenery. Per mile, I think it's the nicest hike either Wyoming and I have ever done. Just fantastic scenery, that classic Canadian Rockies. So, yep, every year is different. And when Wyoming was driving up now to work in Denali, she went through Jasper, where that route goes through. And like the hostel we stayed at, in the hostel I stayed at when I paddled the Athabasca Mackenzie system, burnt down in a forest fire. Apparently something like a quarter of Jasper burned down in recent years since then. So at any rate, yeah, your luck with forest fires has a big effect on adventures.
Didn't you say at one point that you gave high praise to the North Shore of Minnesota, the Lake Superior near Grand Marais, et cetera, as being one of the more scenic places you've seen?
Yeah, it's fantastic, of course, especially say when you and me and Howie were doing that section, when the colors are changing and looking across the lake and those rock outcroppings, and it just has a great feel to it. I love that country.
Did you want to talk about perceived risk versus real risk outdoors, and what are you really looking out for versus what people are afraid of?
Yeah, that is actually a favorite topic of mine. When you look at the outdoors groups, when you look at backpacking groups or paddling groups or people who spend a lot of time outdoors, clearly the number one concern by a mile is bears. People are discussing bears continuously. Like one of the things that drives me slightly bonkers is people who insist that you need to change clothes that you've cooked in order to sleep in your tent. And I mean, that's kind of extreme. I guess I don't know personally anyone who changes clothing in order to go to sleep. There are just a tiny fraction of the number of people killed by bears that people assume are killed by bears. In the United States, there's something like 1.5 people a year are killed by bears. And if you think about there's 330 million people or whatever, and people are running into bears during spring, summer, and fall, tens of thousands of times a day, the odds of any one of us individually getting killed by a bear are just vanishingly small. And I think if you just do basic things, like if you see a sow grizzly with cubs, don't try to go up and, cuddle the cubs. Or if you're camping on a salmon stream, you should probably avoid camping right on the bear trail, all things being equal. Or if you're a elk hunter and you've bagged a big bull elk and go back to finish packing it out the next day, you should be aware that there's a chance a grizzly bear has claimed it, and that is legitimately dangerous, that kind of thing. But for the typical person, camping, paddling, biking in bear country, the actual odds of something bad happening are just really, really low. And the things that really kill people are things like falling. I think falling might be the number one thing that kills outdoors people, probably 1,000 times as many as bears, literally 1,000 times as many. And hypothermia and avalanches. I don't know how many people are killed by avalanches each year in Alaska compared to bears, but it's many times more. Drowning, it must be 100 or 1,000 times more people killed by drowning and lightning and even murder. If you talk about the long trails, one factor I cite is, say, on the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide Trail, there's never been a hiker in history killed by bears. There's been people hit by cars. There's been a handful of murders. There's been a few drownings and people falling and stuff, but no one has ever been killed by bears. And that's the number one thing people talk about. So bears, it's completely natural to be afraid of bears because it's not so long ago that bears were running down our caveman ancestors and eating them left and right. But nowadays there's definitely some risk, but it's hugely overstated.
I think one risk that I might have underestimated when I was up there maybe is crossing a very fast river if it's like thigh deep and getting swept away.
Absolutely. Yeah. You remember that Wyoming had a really close call when we were on the Pacific Crest Trail. It was one of the two scariest things I ever witnessed. She got swept away in an icy river. It was pretty horrible. She was okay, but I thought it was not looking good. And like when Wyoming and I were hiking the Great Divide Trail, for some reason, the trail was paralleling a river, and it made sense to walk in the river for a way. And it was about thigh deep. And I was walking along the edge, and my foot got caught on a root that was growing out in the river, and I could not get my foot loose. I bet it took me a minute to get my foot loose. And if that had been fast water and if I'd fallen down, that would have been the end of me because I would not have been able to get up on my feet. So that particular risk is called foot entrapment. And again, that kills many times more people than bears. And very few people have even heard of foot entrapment.
When you're camping in timber, do you take a look around just in case you look around to see if there's a dead tree that's going to possibly fall on you, that type of thing?
Yeah, I absolutely try to do that. Occasionally, I'm sure I forget, but Sometimes it's obvious. If there's a lot of dead trees around, I really try to avoid that because I've seen big trees fall down plenty of times. And one time, one of my buddies and I were in Western Alaska, and I was setting up a freestanding tent, and I was just positioning it, and I heard a crack, and a tree broke off. It was falling, and I ran with the tent, and it fell where I had been planning to set up the tent. And this isn't like, it wasn't a giant sequoia, but it was enough for if it hit you in the head, right, it could kill you. So it happens in the real world. And Wyoming tells the story when she was hiking the Continental Divide Trail one year. It was a windy day, and she was in northern Colorado, right on the Wyoming border, and a giant dead tree broke off. And due to all the wind noise, she didn't hear it. And she said it literally missed her, the trunk of this huge tree, by like 2 feet. Oh. And it was just random chance. So, yep.
Do you have any other tips for kind of rookies that go outdoors, not just safety, but just the comfort, or any tips that you've learned through hard experience or not?
Yeah, one would be like really plan for keeping your sleeping bag dry. I think we both have learned that if you can sleep warm and dry every night, you can put up with a lot. So a standard way I help keep my sleeping bag dry is I put it usually in the bottom of my pack in a trash compactor bag. Trash compactor bags are really strong. You can put holes in them, but if you're careful, they can last for months. And if you put your clothing and your sleeping bag in a trash compactor bag and twist the top and tuck it in, even if you're crossing a creek and you fall in, as long as you decide not to go for a long swim, it'll keep your sleeping bag dry. That's a big one. Respect steep places. If it seems sketchy, like if you're on a steep, frozen snow slope, and it's giving you the willies, there's probably good reason it's giving you the willies. A fall can have big consequences in cases like that. Like you mentioned, respect river crossings. If it looks like a really sketchy river crossing, say if it's fast water and it's thigh deep, you got to think about it hard. You got to think about what's downstream. Make sure there's no log jams or waterfalls or whatever below you. Definitely look for the easiest spot to cross. You might have to scout for an hour, but it's well worth your time. Go upstream, look for a place where it's braided out, where it's shallower, where the water's slower. That would be some of the things. If you're in mountainous country, say like if you're in the Rockies, a lot of times there'll be thunderstorms show up, maybe 2:00 in the afternoon, something like that. With lightning, don't be on ridge tops if the lightning's pounding down. That occasionally kills someone. That would be a few of them.
I mean, if you are caught in a lightning storm, you just get to low ground and lay down, or what do you do? Or lay on a camping pad? Does that help any?
Yeah, people disagree about that. I think the number one thing is, like, if you're on a ridge line, a lot of times you could see that thunderstorms rolling in. When they're rolling in, just lose some altitude, get down lower on the mountain. If you're 500 feet below the summit in a stand of small trees, your odds of getting hit are just about zero. So get off the ridge line. And of course, if you're in flat country, don't sit under that big, beautiful, tall tree that'll protect you from rain. Anything that could be a lightning rod, stay away from. Yep.
All right. Any other points you want to make before we finish this one up here?
You know what? I think that's basically it. I like to say, a lot of times people say you should, never hike by yourself. It's not worth it, or, this or that's dangerous. And you have to be rational on your evaluations of all danger. Adventure within your limits. Recognize what you do and you don't know. Don't think you're immortal. But I think one of the biggest risks is not living your life. I think some people are so scared of becoming the victim of a bear or getting lost or something like that, that they don't live their full life. So use good judgment and have fun.
All right. On that note, we'll wrap it up. But thanks a lot. This is very interesting. I hope to have you on again if you have more time later.
All right. Thank you, Tom.
Bruce Buck Nelson, back.